Do you ever read the Old Testament and get lost? I think sometimes it's easy to do that because there's so many unfamiliar geographic places and there's so many unfamiliar names that as a modern reader, you read those things and think, what does this have to do with the point? Well, that's exactly what takes place in Isaiah 13 through 27. Numbers of people get really confused about the geography because Babylon is there, and Assyria is there, and Cush is there, and Philistia is there, and Moab is there, and you're thinking, what are all these places, and what do they have to do with me? In this video, I'm going to show you the movement of Isaiah 13 through 27. It is a fascinating passage. I'm going to show you how to read it, and how to read it well. What's beneath the text? What's Isaiah trying to communicate to his audience? And hopefully, you'll become a better reader of the Bible because of it. So this week we're reading Isaiah 13 through 27, which is a fascinating passage of Scripture, but there's a lot of geography in it. And because there's a lot of geography in it, sometimes we don't read it. We overlook it, or we read it and we miss the point. The question behind these chapters is quite simple. Who really rules the world? Now, Isaiah is looking at a world that's full of powerful nations. Babylon looks powerful. Assyria looks powerful. Egypt looks powerful. Tyre is very wealthy and secure. But Isaiah wanted his readers and us to see something different, and that is that the Lord is king over every nation, that he alone brings proud kingdoms down, and he saves those who trust in him. And even eventually, he will defeat death, and he will reign over the whole world one day. Now, in this passage, the big map, as you're reading it, Isaiah 13 through 27 breaks down into two nice sections. One is chapters 13 through 23, and the other is Isaiah 24 through 27. Now, Isaiah 13 through 23, the idea behind that passage is God rules over the nations. So what Isaiah does in these chapters is takes us on a tour of nations. You find lots of nations here: Babylon, Assyria, Cush, Egypt, Tyre, Philistia, Moab. It's almost like a machine gun. He's just showing us nation after nation and nation after nation. And again, the message is there is no nation that is too powerful for God. But then in chapter 24, the camera pulls back. And you're not looking just at the Middle East and the nations in the Middle East, but now in chapters 24 through 27, you're looking at the whole earth. So the story is no longer about one empire falling. It's not about Babylon or Assyria or Cush. It's about God judging evil, God saving his people, God defeating death and establishing his kingdom for eternity. Now, in that first section, chapters 13 through 23, there's a number of movements that I want you to pick up on as you're reading. The first one is Isaiah 13 and 14. So if you were sitting down and reading Isaiah 13 through 27, 13 through 14 would be the first main point that you would want to read. And these two chapters have a very vivid lesson. Now, Babylon represents proud human power. In fact, the king says, I will ascend, I will raise my throne, I will make myself like the Most High. You can notice a similarity in the statements made by this king. I will, I will, I will. You see, human pride always says, I will. And the lesson to learn here in 13:14 is that God says, I am the king. The next, right there in the middle of chapter 14, you've got a few verses on the Assyrian Empire. And the Assyrian Empire was unstoppable. They were a major force. And if you read these verses, God says, as I have planned, so shall it be. And what we learn from these few verses is that nations make plans, but God makes history. The third section inside of 13 through 23 is 14:28 through chapter 20. So it's a much bigger section, but it encompasses all the surrounding nations. Chapters 13 through 23 has a lot of geography. And if you're not careful, that geography is going to distract you from the main point. Isaiah turns to nation after nation: Philistia, Moab, Damascus, Cush, Egypt, different nations, different problems. But the thing you watch for in these almost 6 chapters is that every nation that looks powerful is actually living under God's authority. Here's a map of Isaiah 13 through 23, just so you can have like a view of what's going on in the Middle East. As you see on the right, in purple, it's Babylon. And then the passage moves to Assyria. And you would think that the next move is Damascus, but it's not. If you notice, it's actually number 3. It's Philistia. And then it moves to 4, which is Moab, and then goes back to Damascus, which is in between Assyria and Tyre. And then 6 is Cush, Ethiopia. 7 is Egypt. 8 is Edom. 9 is Arabia. 10 is kind of peculiar, though. This is chapter 22. This is about Jerusalem. And then the last one, of course, is Tyre. And there's a pattern here, from east to west, from north to south, and all in between. The Lord is declaring through Isaiah 13 through 23 that there is no nation beyond his authority. So as you're reading Isaiah 13 through 23, remember that the Lord is moving across the ancient world. He's judging pride, he's judging violence, and he is exposing false security from every one of these nations, because ultimately he does not want his people to trust in these foreign alliances. He desires for his people to trust in him. Well, in chapter 21, we come back to Babylon. Babylon appears again, and now we hear this phrase, fallen, fallen is Babylon. This unbeatable empire will now fall. And the lesson that you learn here is that earthly kingdoms do not last forever. And then, as that map showed, more nations: Edom, Arabia, Jerusalem, Tyre. Even Jerusalem is not automatically safe here. Because the real issue is not which country are you from. The real issue is, in whom are you trusting? And more specifically for his people, will you trust in the Lord? Well, like I said originally, after chapter 23, chapter 24 takes a hard right turn. And chapters 24 through 27 form the second big section in Isaiah 13 through 27. And the camera pulls back from that Middle East, and now you're looking at the entire world. So far, from chapters 13 to 23, Isaiah has talked about particular nations. But now Isaiah is no longer talking about Babylon or Egypt or Tyre. He now is using the word earth. The Lord is king, not merely over Israel or Babylon or Egypt or Tyre, or not even merely over the Middle East. He is the king over the whole world. In chapter 24, human rebellion has affected the entire world. In fact, when you read chapter 24, I want you to notice how he says there is an everlasting curse. This is referring to the fall of Adam. And so, since this human rebellion has affected the whole earth, God's judgment will reach the whole earth also. Kings will not escape. Nations will not escape. The powerful will not escape. The proud will not escape. And this chapter ends with something I think quite astonishing. It says, the Lord of hosts reigns. And that's the point. When you read Isaiah 24, there is this wonderful hope that is welling up inside of the readers, that when earthly kingdoms are shaken, God is still the king. In chapters 25 and 26, there's a feast for the nations. After judgment comes a banquet. God prepares a feast for all peoples. Notice that. Not just Israel, but all peoples. You see, God's plan from the beginning in Adam, and then Noah, and then Abraham, all the way to the person of Jesus Christ, has always been bigger than one nation. It's always been for all peoples, all nations, all tribes. In chapter 25, you find something kind of fascinating. In verses 7 and 8, the Lord destroys an enemy that's even greater than Babylon, greater than Assyria, and greater than Egypt. It's the enemy known as death. In fact, Isaiah says something pretty fascinating that I want you to focus on when you read Isaiah 25. He says, He will swallow up death forever. And I want you to make a cross reference because the Apostle Paul wrote 1 Corinthians. And in 1 Corinthians 15, the Apostle Paul takes up Isaiah 25. And he applies Isaiah 25 to the person and work of Jesus. Well, back in Isaiah 25, he not only says he will swallow up death forever, but he says God will wipe away tears from all faces. Now, this is interesting too, and I want you to focus on it because John the Apostle in the book of Revelation, particularly Revelation 21, says that when Christ returns and he brings the new heavens and new earth, he will wipe away all tears from their eyes. So you have two apostles in the New Testament. One is Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, and one is John, who wrote the Revelation, both of whom using Isaiah 25 and applying it to Jesus and his work. So God doesn't merely beat bad kingdoms, as we've seen in chapters 13 through 23, but God actually beats and defeats the main enemy of his people, which is death. So even the dead will live. You see this in chapter 26. Isaiah's hope even gets bigger. He says, your dead shall live. So God's salvation reaches beyond armies and politics and earthly problems. And the God who rules the nations also has the power over the grave. Now, in chapter 27, God gathers his people. Now, this section is about God gathering scattered people. There's a trumpet that sounds. The lost return, the scattered come home, and they all worship the Lord. So there's a pattern that's beginning to emerge as you read 24 through 27. And this is where the story's heading. It starts with judgment, and then salvation, and then it ends in worship. So just to back up for a moment and see the whole picture, Isaiah 13 through 23, the Lord rules over the nations. No earthly power is ultimate. Babylon falls, Assyria falls, Egypt falls, Tyre falls, even Jerusalem is corrected. And then in chapter 24, the Lord judges the whole world. So the problem is worldwide. Then in 25 through 27, the Lord saves and reigns. He prepares a feast for the nations. He swallows up death. He wipes away the tears from their eyes. He raises the dead. He defeats evil. He restores the vineyard. He gathers his people, and his people worship him. So this whole section of Isaiah 13 through 27, is fascinating. And if you just read this and find geography, then you've missed the point. And here's the point. After you read Isaiah 13 through 27, you should come away with this idea. The Lord rules over every nation. He judges human pride and rebellion. He saves those who trust him. And one day he will defeat death and establish his kingdom over the whole earth.